clear. Now before I begin this video, I want to make something very clear. This video is an opinion. I know that should be obvious and I shouldn't have to say that, but this is the internet, which is all the explanation you need as to why I need to say that it's an opinion. So unless you've been living under a rock for the past several years, you know that no matter what Sega does with Sonic, no matter how well they explain it, it gets hated. You have critics saying that Sega should just kill off Sonic, letting him go the way like characters acquired by Microsoft that aren't Master Chief, just locked in a dungeon to rot away until they're completely forgotten. But let's ask ourselves, why do a majority of the Sonic games that come out lately get the negative reception that they get, and is it warranted? Most of you are probably already typing away in the comments right now if you haven't already, saying that they are warranted and probably getting ready to click off the video since that seems to be the norm nowadays, as no one has the patience to wait until all the arguments are heard. Sonic is pretty much the whipping boy of the game industry now. No matter how hard Sega tries, the games nowadays are met with disgust. IGN liked Sonic Lost World when it was shown off, but turned around and bashed it. GameSpot gave Sonic Generations an 8 out of 10, then turned around and bashed it later. And even the official Sonic the Hedgehog Twitter called them out on it. I think that Sonic is literally a whipping boy. I think that the mainstream gaming media is so frustrated with the state of AAA games being overhyped and underdelivered that they take it out on Sonic games because it's an easy target. Think about it. Which one is going to get them less hate? Saying Watch Dogs wasn't as good as they hoped? Or saying that the latest Sonic game sucks? After Shadow the Hedgehog and Sonic 06, Sonic is like the kid at school that had the stomach flu and shit his pants, so now everyone relentlessly makes fun of him. Sure, there were a small handful of games that were actually bad, but there was others that were mediocre. But Sega has learned from their mistakes and started putting out quality Sonic games after Sonic 06, minus Sonic Boom for the Wii U. But while Sonic Unleashed was praised for the day stages, the night stages were criticized. But those night stages were well-made platforming, exploration, puzzle solving, and beat-em-up stages. But someone will say that those werehog stages don't belong in a Sonic game, or when Sonic has a spin-off that's an RPG or is in a racing game, you constantly hear people say that it's not good because it's not a Sonic game. The game's quality doesn't matter. That plays second fiddle to the fact that it's not a quote-unquote Sonic game. So it's okay for Mario to have his party spin-offs, kart racing, and RPGs, but not Sonic. It's a sad double standard, which is probably why Sonic doesn't partake in many spin-offs. I've been doing this YouTube thing for 4 years now. I've reviewed quite a few Sonic games. I read the comments, which is usually the rule number 1 of things not to do as a YouTube content creator, but it has led to insight into the minds of Sonic fans, which is generally the second rule of things not to do. I say it all the time that Sonic fans can't agree on anything when it comes to what makes a Sonic game, or what a Sonic game should consist of. And the funny thing is, it really isn't Sega's fault either, as they've kept the core mechanics pretty consistent over the series with the exception of spin-off titles. Sonic has always been a platform game, there's no doubt about that, but the fact that Sonic is a fast-moving character is what separates him from the rest. Saying that Sonic is about platforming with speed being the reward for good platforming is, I find, incorrect. I know that someone out there's typing a comment right now vehemently saying and explaining why I'm wrong, but stop typing and listen. The logic of speed being the reward for good platforming can be applied to any and all platform games. Look at Rayman Origins or Legends. I've blazed through those games. Speed was my reward for good platforming. Same goes with Mario games. Mario and Rayman are not fast-moving characters, but with the right amount of skill, speed is your reward for good platforming. So if good platforming equals speed for all platform games, what is it that separated Sonic from the rest? Well, in that case, we need to look at level design, as that is a huge part of any platform game. When we look at a platform game, the level design is actually rather rigid and square-like in design. It allows for optimal control of the character in the environment. As you go higher up in levels, they start adding larger gaps to jump across and they put more enemies in the way. But the level design is still rather rigid, which is another reason as to why I say that Sonic games are about speed first, then platforming, not the other way around, and it's for this reason. If you're designing your platform game's levels, then put a speedy character in it, you'll find that the game doesn't work right. If you look at all the Sonic ripoffs from the 90s, like Bubsy, Awesome Possum, or Radical Rex, those games tried to put a speedy character in a more rigid environment, but those games didn't play that well unless you slowed down. Their levels weren't designed for speed, so from a design perspective, you'll need to have a speedy character in mind. Then build those levels for speed. The 2 Sonic fan games I reviewed, before and after the sequel, did this. Even Freedom Planet does this to a degree, and that started out as a Sonic fan game first until it became its own thing. A Sonic level isn't rigid at all. In fact, it's very flowing. There's slopes, hills, loops, large gaps to jump across. A Sonic level is designed with one aspect in mind: speed and methods to maintain that speed. Then it focuses on platforming elements, which they design with keeping up that high speed movement going. But as you go up in levels, things start changing gradually over the course of the game. The levels become more rigid. There will be subtle little things where you may need to grab onto stuff and climb across, slowing you down. But then when you get really late into the game, you're doing a lot of platforming. The platforms are closer together to force you to slow down so you don't overshoot your jumps, because the game is purposely slowing you down to increase difficulty. Because if you notice, the less rigid a Sonic level is, the easier it is. So when you put Sonic in a completely rigid environment, you get Sonic Lost World, where there was a complete lack of speed. Same with Sonic Boom for the Wii U, but that game has other problems. Lost World focused solely on platforming. Speed was a complete afterthought, as you can tell, because of one thing: the level design. It's more Mario-like than Sonic. Sonic can't be Sonic in a rigid environment. You can try, and Lost World did try, but it didn't really work as planned. I can guarantee you that if Mario was in Lost World, it would have been praised 100 times over and got perfect scores. Which gives credibility that the mainstream gaming media likes to bash Sonic because it's the cool thing to do. If you look at Sonic 1, you have Green Hill, which is a flowing stage. Then Marble Zone, which is more rigid. Spring Yard, which is a combination of flowing with rigid parts being more pinball-like. There's Labyrinth Zone, which is very rigid. Starlight, which is very flowing. And then the final level, Scrap Brain, is rigid. This is the first game in the series, so they had to get a feel of what worked and what didn't. But I want you to keep this in mind for later. Spring Yard and Starlight are two flowing stages, and they're easier stages than Marble and Labyrinth. Now let's take a look at Sonic 2. Emerald Hill flows, Chemical Plant flows, Aquatic Ruin is flowing or rigid depending on how you go. Casino Night is rigid, but it's fast-paced due to the pinball nature. Hilltop starts getting rigid. Mystic Cave increases the rigid design by cramping things up. Oil Ocean increases the rigidness, but has some flowing elements to it. Metropolis Zone is very platform-centric. Sky Chase and Wing Fortress are entirely platforming stages. Have you noticed a pattern? The more you go up in levels, the more the difficulty increases because of the increase of platforming and other obstacles you need to overcome. In addition to Sonic wanting to go fast means you need to control his speed so he doesn't take damage or get killed. So increasing the difficulty in Sonic 1, CD, and 2 was done by slowing you down so that you had to face the obstacles. Sonic 3 and Knuckles refined upon Sonic 2, managing to keep the flowing pace by greatly increasing the size of the levels while throwing obstacles in your way. But it wasn't as heavy on increasing the amount of platforming to slow you down as the previous 3 entries did to increase the difficulty, but instead put the obstacles in the flowing path of the stages to increase difficulty. It was Sonic 3 and Knuckles that pretty much set this premise for every major Sonic game after that. Sonic Adventure and its sequel-style Sonic stages did the same thing, keeping that flowing pace so you can go fast, but littering the path with obstacles instead of having flowing path that stops with a bunch of obstacles. Sonic Heroes would do the same, although you did have to stop to take care of enemies that were in your way, because you needed to defeat them all to unlock a switch, but you could bypass a bunch of them if you chose to do so. But Sonic Adventure, Adventure 2, and Hero stages were very linear. There was only one real path for you to go, with a rare shortcut. Sonic 06 actually went closer to what Sonic 2 did, where the level would flow but would stop you to overcome an obstacle by platforming in the later levels. However, Sonic 06 wasn't really made for Sonic, but for Silver. Unleashed, Colors, and Generations followed the Sonic 3 formula, keeping a flowing pace and littering the path with obstacles. I've seen people complain about these games about feeling like they're on a track, but yet praise Adventure 1 and 2, two games that are the most track-like in the entire franchise. And if you're going to complain about the boost mechanic in Sonic Generations, you didn't have to use it. It was completely optional. Lost World took Sonic from the flowing stages and tried shoehorning him into Mario-style stages. It didn't deliver on the speed, which a lot of people didn't like, but it followed the idea of Sonic being about platforming first with speed as a reward for good platforming. So it should have been the perfect Sonic game. But no. People often praise Sonic Adventure and especially Sonic Adventure 2, the latter of which was very minimal on platforming when it came to playing as Sonic. So the problem is with Sega trying to answer the fans' demands to make the perfect Sonic game. Saying that something isn't a Sonic game isn't helping. Complaining about going fast defeats the entire purpose of a Sonic game, because you enjoy a Sonic game when you're going fast, not because you're platforming, and that's why you play a Sonic game, to go fast. Otherwise you play Mario. Bringing up Lost World again, which is the perfect game by Sonic fan standards, is looked down upon. A lot of people have said that it's too hard, but this goes back to my point. The more rigid the level becomes for Sonic, the more he slows down, the more the difficulty increases. This happens in all Sonic games, because the faster Sonic can move, the easier the game. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the easiest of the classic games. Sonic 2 is more challenging, and then Sonic 1 is the hardest of the Genesis trilogy. As someone who's been playing Sonic games from the very first on the Sega Genesis around the age of 7, I've grown up with the series. I've played all the games. I've seen what's good, what works as its own thing, and what's bad. And I can tell you that the problem isn't really Sega, but people's perspective of what makes a Sonic game. Sure, Sega had a hand in warping that perspective, but they had to change and adapt to the growing technology. Mario had such an easy time transitioning to 3D because he's not a fast-moving character. Same with Rayman and even Bubsy. Granted, Bubsy walked into a glass door, but that's beside the point. Because their levels didn't have to keep up a speedy pace, they pretty much had to make a 2D square into a 3D cube. Sonic's levels, on the other hand, are a bunch of squiggly lines on a 2D plane, which is harder to translate into a 3D environment. What I find odd is that everyone agrees of what makes a Mario game. A lot of people, while admitting that it's good, often say that Mario Sunshine is the oddball of the series because of the flood mechanics. But when it comes to Sonic, you'll hear people praise Sonic Adventure 2 as the best but condemn Generations for being on a track, when in fact Adventure 2 was running on a track, and that train of thought is completely contradictory. I'm not saying that you need to change your perspective to mine. Remember, this is all opinion, with speed being the important part in building a platform game around the concept of speed. But you should change your way of thinking when it comes to each game individually, instead of thinking it's going to automatically be bad because it's Sonic, or thinking that it's a bad game because it doesn't fit whatever your criteria for whatever a Sonic game is. Instead, just look at it as it stands as an individual game instead of part of a group. I have been told that I'm very fair to Sonic games when I review them, and that's because I know what I expect from a Sonic game. And if I'm not getting that, then I look at it as the game stands as an individual, and then base my scores on that.